If you have been watching the 2026 NASCAR Cup Series season closely, something probably feels off to you too. The intensity is there. The speed is absolutely there. But there is something deeper that is missing. That edge. That raw, unpredictable driver control that used to make you lean forward on every single lap, wondering who was going to make a move and win. And here's the thing. This is not just fans talking about it anymore. There is real frustration building inside the NASCAR garage right now. And it is starting to spill out in a way that is very hard to ignore. We're talking about drivers seriously questioning the very foundation of how these races are being structured at some of the most important tracks on the calendar, and pushing for changes that would have sounded completely unthinkable just a few seasons ago. This is not about small tweaks. This is the kind of conversation that could completely reshape what NASCAR racing looks like going forward. So if you care about where this sport is actually headed, you're going to want to hear all of this. And if you're new here, go ahead and drop a like and subscribe to NASCAR Nation Report. We are building something real here for fans who actually live and breathe this sport. And we are pushing hard to hit 15,000 subscribers. Now here's where things start to hit hard. What has been brewing inside the garage is a growing push from drivers to seriously rethink, and in some cases completely eliminate, the intermediate package that currently governs racing at tracks like Charlotte Motor Speedway, Kansas Speedway, and Las Vegas Motor Speedway. Kansas Speedway is a traditional 1.5-mile intermediate oval, and it is also on the 10-race playoff schedule, which means every single race there carries serious championship weight. If you have watched races at these tracks recently, you probably already feel where this frustration is coming from, even if you could not put exact words to it. The core issue is how these cars behave under the current intermediate rules package. Drivers keep saying the same thing in different ways. The car is too dependent on aerodynamics, and not dependent enough on the driver making it work. Under this setup, NASCAR leans heavily on high downforce and limited horsepower. On paper, that sounds like it should create tight racing with cars close together and real side-by-side action. And sometimes it does. But the trade-off that nobody inside the garage can ignore anymore is this. Clean air has become the most valuable thing on the racetrack. If you're out front, your car is stable, planted, and you can run your line, manage your pace, and control the outcome of the race. The moment you drop into traffic, though, everything changes completely. The dirty air coming off the cars ahead disrupts your balance. Your front end loses grip, the car goes tight, and suddenly you are not driving the racetrack anymore. You are fighting the air just to stay stable. The cars simply cannot pass without forcibly moving another driver out of the way because the aerodynamics have too much influence on cornering, and the cars stall out behind one another in an aerodynamic sense. Drivers are operating in an extremely narrow window. You are not experimenting with different lines. You are not working the throttle the way great drivers used to. You are just trying to keep the car stable in turbulent air. Think about what that actually means for this sport. NASCAR was built on drivers managing tire wear over long runs, controlling throttle input through corners, and finding speed by trying different lines across the track. The consensus inside the garage has been that the racing quality will not meaningfully improve until real changes are made to cut down on aero blocking and create a bigger performance difference between the cars. That is a massive shift from what this sport was built on. And to be fair, NASCAR did not arrive here by accident. The drivers had remained consistent in their belief that horsepower needed to be part of the equation on the bigger tracks. And NASCAR was actively working on the racing product at short tracks and road courses with different aero packages for years before finally committing to changes for 2026. The original intent behind the intermediate package was to keep cars closer together at high speeds, control entry speeds for safety at fast 1.5-mile tracks, and create a more predictable racing product. From a safety and consistency standpoint, that made sense. But from a pure racing standpoint, drivers feel like it has gone too far in the wrong direction. Instead of rewarding the best driver on any given day, the system too often rewards whoever controls track position first. That is not sitting well inside the garage heading into what is shaping up to be a critical stretch of the 2026 season. NASCAR did increase horsepower from 670 to 750 for short tracks and road courses in 2026, and drivers have been asking for that change for years. 5 tracks switched to the new short track and road course aero package with the 750 horsepower setup for 2026, including Bristol, Darlington, Dover, Nashville, and Gateway. That is a real step in the right direction, and the early results at places like Darlington showed genuine promise. Brad Keselowski noted heading into Darlington that the new combination of more horsepower and less aero created a completely different challenge around tire management that drivers had not faced in years. But the core intermediate tracks, the 1.5-mile ovals that make up a massive portion of the Cup Series schedule and the playoff picture, are still running the old system. And that is exactly why this debate is not going anywhere. Because NASCAR has to constantly balance three things at the same time: safety, entertainment, and competitive fairness. And none of those three ever pull in exactly the same direction. But what drivers are asking for is actually pretty simple when you strip it all down. They want a car that genuinely challenges them. They want a machine that demands something from them on every single lap. And as fans watching from the outside, you can feel that tension building every weekend. Yes, we want close racing. Absolutely. But we also want to watch drivers earn it. We want tire strategy to actually matter over a long run. We want mistakes to have real consequences. We want to see drivers searching for grip in different parts of the track, taking risks, and trying things that might not work. The car's over-reliance on aerodynamics, weight, and independent rear suspension means that even with more horsepower in the equation, the fundamental problem of cars not being able to pass without physically moving each other has not been fully addressed. That raw, unpredictable quality is what made this sport genuinely special, and a lot of people inside and outside the garage feel like it has been slowly drained away. So now the big question heading into the rest of the 2026 NASCAR Cup Series season is what actually happens next. Does NASCAR continue making small incremental adjustments around the edges? Or do they take a bigger step and reset things in a more meaningful way? NASCAR executive Mike Ford has already indicated that any further horsepower changes at large intermediate tracks are more of a 2027 situation, with the sport planning to evaluate the full 2026 racing product during the off-season before deciding on next steps. So a complete elimination of the intermediate package is not happening overnight. But the pressure from drivers is real, it is growing, and it is not something NASCAR can keep ignoring indefinitely. If they do eventually make that bigger move and reset the package at tracks like Charlotte Motor Speedway, Kansas Speedway, and Las Vegas Motor Speedway, we could be looking at a completely different style of racing that defines the next era of this sport entirely. Now I want to hear from you directly. Do you think NASCAR should scrap the intermediate package completely, or just keep adjusting it piece by piece? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this is exactly the kind of conversation that matters for where NASCAR goes from here. And here's my honest take on all of this as someone who watches every single week. I think the drivers are completely right to push back this hard. When you watch races at Charlotte or Kansas, you can literally see how much the outcome depends on track position instead of raw driving ability. The leader gets clean air, the car is planted and stable, and they just control the race from the front. The guys behind them are not racing each other. They are fighting their own cars just to stay stable in dirty air. Even NASCAR's own competition leadership acknowledged that drivers have been steadfast in pushing for horsepower to be part of the equation on bigger tracks for years before the 2026 changes were finally approved. That kind of sustained pressure from inside the garage does not come from nothing. It comes from real frustration built up over race after race. For me personally, the biggest problem is not even the lack of passing. It is the lack of struggle. It used to feel like drivers were constantly managing something throughout an entire race. Tires degrading differently on different lines, throttle control through corners, balance changes over a long run, the risk and reward of trying a new groove late in a stint. Now, once the car finds the right aerodynamic window, everything becomes too predictable for too long. NASCAR's own competition director John Probst noted that the goal with any package change is to thread the needle between what the drivers want, what the fans feel watching at home, and what the quantitative data shows about passing rates, lead changes, and how spread out the field runs. That is a genuinely hard balance to strike. But if the price of keeping the field tight is removing the driver as the biggest variable on the racetrack, then something has to change. Do I think they should completely eliminate the intermediate package? Drivers have been pushing NASCAR to run the higher horsepower and reduced downforce setup everywhere. But NASCAR held back at tracks like Michigan, Pocono, and the core mile-and-a-half ovals because they were concerned about entry speeds climbing back toward dangerous levels and did not want to disrupt tracks where the racing was already reasonably competitive. Those are legitimate concerns, and they deserve respect. But increasing horsepower and reducing downforce at the right tracks would instantly bring back that feeling of drivers having to work for every single position. You would see more mistakes. You would see more variation in strategy. You would see more moments where pure talent and feel for the car actually makes the difference between winning and finishing fifth. More horsepower means more throttle modulation, more tire heat, and more opportunities for mistakes. And that is usually exactly where the most exciting racing happens. At the same time, NASCAR is not going to flip the switch completely overnight, and that is probably the right approach. They will keep adjusting things methodically, evaluating each change against the data and the feedback from inside the garage. But if the pressure from drivers keeps building throughout the 2026 season, and fans keep feeling the same disconnect between the speed on the track and the actual drama of the racing, eventually a bigger move becomes unavoidable. Because at the end of the day, this sport is at its absolute best when the driver is the biggest variable on the racetrack. And right now, a lot of the best drivers in the world feel like that is simply not the case anymore at intermediate tracks. That matters, and NASCAR knows it. If you are into real NASCAR conversations like this one, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to NASCAR Nation Report. We are a brand new channel building something for real NASCAR fans who care about more than just the box scores. And we are pushing hard to reach 15,000 subscribers. Drivers are pushing hard right now to move away from the current intermediate package at tracks like Charlotte Motor Speedway, Kansas Speedway, and Las Vegas Motor Speedway. They're calling for more horsepower, less aerodynamic dependence, and cars that demand real skill and real throttle control again. What comes next in this conversation could genuinely change everything about how NASCAR races are won and lost going forward. The message coming out of the NASCAR garage right now could not be clearer. Drivers want control back in their hands. They want to feel like the outcome of a race is determined by what they do behind the wheel over 300 laps, not by who grabbed the best track position on the first restart and then managed clean air for the rest of the afternoon. NASCAR's own competition leadership has acknowledged that when they were finally ready to commit to package changes for 2026, many drivers pushed back and said they wanted the higher horsepower and reduced downforce setup run everywhere, not just at select tracks. That tells you everything about how deep this frustration actually runs inside the garage. It is not one or two voices. It is a consistent message that has been building for years and is now reaching a genuine decision point. Now it is up to NASCAR to decide whether to keep making careful, calculated adjustments around the edges or take a bolder step into a new era of racing entirely. The sport has already signaled that any further changes to the intermediate package are being treated as a post-2026 conversation, with executives planning to evaluate how the full season plays out at mile-and-a-half tracks before committing to anything more significant for 2027 and beyond. That is a measured and understandable approach. But for fans who have been watching this tension build race after race, it also means this conversation is not going away anytime soon. And honestly, as NASCAR fans who care about this sport at a deeper level, that makes this one of the most genuinely exciting turning points we have seen in a long time. Because the stakes are not small. The stakes are the identity of NASCAR itself going forward. This is not just about one rules package or a handful of races at intermediate tracks. This is about what kind of sport NASCAR wants to be for the next decade. The consensus inside the garage has long been that the racing quality will not reach its full potential until real structural changes are made to cut down on aerodynamic blocking and put more of the performance difference back in the hands of the driver. If NASCAR leans fully into those changes and gives drivers the kind of car that demands constant work, the kind of racing we could see at Charlotte Motor Speedway, Kansas Speedway, and Las Vegas Motor Speedway would look completely different. Drivers constantly working the wheel throughout a run. Tire management becoming a genuine strategic weapon again. Different lines opening up across the track as grip changes over a long stint. Actual passing created by skill and risk-taking instead of waiting for clean air and the right pit sequence to line everything up. That is the version of NASCAR that built this sport into what it is, and a lot of people inside and outside the garage want it back. NASCAR has made it clear through their competition leadership that they listen to both what drivers want and what fans actually respond to emotionally, and that sometimes those two things do not perfectly align, which is why threading the needle on any package change is genuinely complicated. If they do not make that bigger move, and the 2026 intermediate races continue to feel processional and track position dependent, this conversation inside the garage is only going to get louder heading into the 2027 season planning cycle. Either way, something meaningful is coming. The only real question is how long it takes to get there and how bold NASCAR is willing to be when the moment arrives. And the truth is, moments like this do not come around often in any major sport. This is how eras actually change in NASCAR. Not overnight, not with a single announcement, but through sustained pressure from drivers who feel the gap between what the car is capable of and what it is actually being allowed to do. Through fans feeling that same disconnect every weekend and making their voices heard in the comments, in the ratings, and in the conversations that eventually reach the people making these decisions. The 2026 season was framed as a notable step forward with the horsepower increases at short tracks and road courses. But the bigger test of whether NASCAR is truly willing to rethink its intermediate program is still ahead. The direction of that conversation is being shaped right now, in real time, through every race at every 1.5-mile oval on this year's schedule. So keep your eyes on this story because the next significant move NASCAR makes on the intermediate package question is not just another routine rule tweak buried in a technical bulletin. It could fundamentally redefine how we experience NASCAR racing every single weekend, at the tracks that sit at the very heart of the Cup Series schedule and the championship fight. This is the conversation that matters most for the future of this sport, and we are right in the middle of it.